All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, we are recording this, so if you have anyone on your board who wants to view it after, or you know someone who wasn't able to make it, we will be sure to share the recording on our Chapter Learning YouTube page. But we are here today for another installment of our Chapter Knowledge series on DEI and what it means to our chapters. And I have the honor to be joined with several of our task force members at our headquarters level that is working on this initiative for us. And first of all, before we get started, I just want to ask that you come to this open-minded, that we would love for you to share at the end any challenges you're having or any successes you're having in relation to this. And we just really want this to be an open dialogue, because what better way to get feedback from each other than to share with each other. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our speakers today. I'm going to introduce them first, and then I'll turn it over to Augustus. But first, we have Augustus Shaw, who is actually chairing this subcommittee of working with chapters on DEI. He's also on the Board of Trustees for CCAL, and he is with Shaw and Lines. Then we have Noelle Hicks, who is with RMWBH. She is an attorney with them. We have Melissa Ramsey, who is a CMCA, AMS, LSM, and PCAM with CCMC, also on our Board of Trustees at the headquarters level. And then we have Lex Firehawk with Carpenter Hazelwood, an attorney there as well. So you are in great hands for this discussion today, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Augustus to get us started.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon for some, good morning for those of us on the West Coast. Thank you for taking time out of your day to attend this very important webinar. We took a lot of time and effort in coordinating this webinar to provide some very important information on a national level. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I always like to start out by listing the acronym, diversity, equity, and inclusion, because while I would hope that we would all be familiar with it, some of us may not be. So as we all know, diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that has started to really come to the forefront in our nation. A lot of the conversations regarding DEI started to become prominent in 2020 and the events of the summer of 2020 with George Floyd and the other protests that took place then. You have that in concert with the COVID-19 pandemic, and it really brought these issues to the fore. Now, it's important that we all know and we all understand, and I'm sure we do, that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not something that just happened in 2020. It has been something that has been on the minds and on the hearts of many CAI leaders throughout the country, because it is important. Our CAI is about community, and all of us have a role to play in the various community associations across the country, and those community associations are diverse. And so in order for us to better understand our clientele, and in order for us to better serve them, it's important to understand issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion so that all of our clientele feel like they are included in the process. On August 18th of 2021, the CAI Board of Trustees approved a new CAI Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Statement that was the initial work of an internal task force made up of CAI headquarters staff. CAI and the DEI task force have been promoting the organization's commitment to creating a culture that supports and advances diversity, equity, and inclusion for all members and staff. And that was a great day and a great thing that the national organization did, because it really did show that we do, as a national organization, care about this issue. However, creating a statement is great, but living the statement and bringing the statement and having everyone understand and honor the statement is a broader goal that hopefully in this webinar we'll be able to address. Now, I just wanted to read to everyone the actual statement. I believe links to the statement will be placed in the chat, and the actual statement is online, but I would just like to read it. Community Associations Institute is committed to making diversity, equity, and inclusion a core aspect. Oh, I'm sorry, I just lost. My apologies. There we go. Let me start over. I just kind of lost my screen. Community Associations Institute is committed to making diversity, equity, and inclusion a core aspect in our membership, our staffs, and within the community association housing model at large. We firmly believe in the unique strengths of every individual and that diversity makes organizations more successful and communities more fulfilling. By actively cultivating diversity, we benefit from a vastly richer mix of ideas, perspectives, and life experiences that expand our thinking and our possibilities. We strive to foster a culture of discovery, innovation, and service, and we continue to focus on our mission to build better communities. So one of the purposes of today's chat is to really talk about the statement and to hopefully understand that the statement is more than just words on a paper. It is a philosophy. It's a lifestyle. And again, as I said in my earlier comments, hopefully it will help us all serve our clientele better. In order to help the national organization promulgate this statement amongst the various chapters, a task force was created outside of CAI national staff in January of 2022. The task force is chaired by Will Washington, one of the great luminaries of us attorneys and a member of CCAL. There are many different representatives on this committee. There are attorneys, there are managers, there are industry leaders, industry professionals. We've all come together to discuss how we can better serve CAI through the implementation of the DEI statement. And so I welcome you to provide any questions or comments you may have. As Emily stated earlier, it's great that we come at this with an open mind. And if I can just add one more point to this, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is not just the protected classes and things of that nature. It's all of us. Every single one of us, we all have a unique perspective, and that perspective should be honored and listened to. And so it's our hope that all of us together, coming together and sharing our unique aspects of ourselves, will make the industry better. With that, I'd like to throw it over to Melissa to talk about other issues. Melissa?
Thank you. So it has been a very unique conversation over the last year, not only for the task force, but also from a board perspective as well. The board met just last week to have further discussion around the efforts of DEI and what that means for the organization. And as Augustus mentioned, this has been ongoing for several years in evaluating the climate that we live in. And it's different in different parts of the country for each of us as individuals, for the unique components of the communities. And one of the items that has come out of this is through the Foundation for Community Association Research. And that was the Creating Harmony in Diverse Communities publication. If you have not looked at that, or maybe it's been a little while, strongly encourage you to download that again and review that, because all of our communities are diverse, and not just communities from the perspective of the individual homeowners associations, but our communities as to our chapters, our local environments, our friends and family, all of our communities that we are a part of bring diverse perspectives to the table. One of the examples that I always like to give is growing up in the South, but moving to the West Coast, y'all versus you guys is a big deal. You have to know where you are in the country in order to address people appropriately. And people can take offense to that. And it was something that for me was an eye-opening experience when I offended someone for saying you guys, because I had previously offended someone for saying y'all. So I try and avoid both now. But we need to be mindful of what those conversations, what the dialogue is in order to appropriately interact with these communities. And so with that, the task force initially started of where do we go? What is the desire? Where do we want to achieve success? What's important to the industry? And so at this point in time, we've identified 3 areas to dive into, if you will. And the first one is the development of a 400 level course specific to the components of DEI. So as you can imagine, you could have a very long conversation and dialogue around the different parts that it incorporates from a communication standpoint, how you're addressing an architectural application, community events, facilities. I mean, it plays into so many things. So taking it to an advanced level within the organization and the training program. But then also the second one was the CAI materials. And that's something, when we say materials, you don't realize the magnitude of resources that CAI has produced over the years until you start peeling back the onion of how many things need to be edited. So that's everything from a course certificate to the course materials that are offered through the 200 series, for example. And so prioritizing those, what needs to be updated, what are changes in words, identifying some things say his, hers, should they say they. And then the third piece is why we're here today speaking to you is the chapter involvement, and recognizing that as a community, the chapters are a fundamental piece to delivering information to our members. And so we want to make sure that we are partnering with all of you in order to find out what is resourceful, best practices, communication tips, in order to take it not just to the managers, but the board members, the vendors. I mean, business partners absolutely play a key part of this. And so with that, because I know Lex and Noelle are going to touch on those aspects, I will turn it over to them.
Thanks so much, Melissa. So again, my name is Noelle Hicks, and Lex Firehawk and I are going to address a couple of things. We're going to start off with talking about chapter diversity and education. And I think one of the big reasons why we are going to talk about these things is since this initiative, since its inception, we have gotten a lot of questions. Why are we doing this? What's the benefit for the chapters, the community, so on and so forth? And we have addressed, certain chapters, but we'd like to just kind of do like an overall conversation. Hopefully it will help to answer some of the questions. And of course, as Emily mentioned at the inception, if you guys have any additional questions about what we're saying, please feel free to ask us, because we are definitely here today to make sure that we can get all of your questions answered. So just to kind of dig in a little bit deeper into like chapter diversity and education as it relates to these DEI statements and why we're doing this. DEI statements are very similar to mission statements or vision statements, right? They provide a guiding principle for your chapter to aspire to. And when you define what your commitment is to diversity, equity, inclusion, it actually really directs what the chapter's actions are going to be. It's that front-facing statement that everyone kind of understands and hopefully gets on board with to just kind of make sure that all your actions aligns. it really sets the foundation for what you want everyone to know and believe about your chapter and how it acts, and how it functions. But then in turn, the various associated entities, and we'll talk about, business partners in just a second, but it holds you to that commitment and just kind of make sure that your actions as a chapter reflects the values that you hold and that you're demonstrating them daily.
Yeah, so that DEI statement that Noelle describes, it really serves as a point of reference, right? So it helps to inform communication and action going forward. So you make the statements, and then it's a point of reference, and it could be in everything you do from there. Education really starts with awareness. And so that's why this statement is sort of our first piece here. When you dive deeper into efforts, we just want to acknowledge that efforts are most successful when you ease into it, right? And you don't just cramp down. So, and you'll notice that in our tone in this presentation today, right? It's about, setting foundations, defining some words, and understanding sort of an overall concept. The next big action step is to adopt the statement, make the public commitment, and then actions go from there. Noelle, before we go on, I just want to say a couple of things about the task force. So first, as Augustus and Melissa talked about, our task force itself is really diverse. And so we're really lawyer heavy today. And I think that's like a scheduling thing. And, anytime there's an opportunity to talk, the lawyers are like, oh, we'll talk. Yeah, so that's why we're lawyer heavy, but please don't take that as, any sort of statement otherwise, right? Like we're just, the ones that wanted to talk. And then also just wanted to offer, as both Melissa and Noelle said, that the task force is totally here to support the chapters. So we're part of that subcommittee about chapter involvement. So we're excited at the opportunity to speak to a broad audience today, but if any of you want to dive in deeper or have specific questions or have a specific talk that you would like us to help support you with for your chapter, we're happy to help with that too. So please don't be shy about reaching out.
Yeah, definitely. I like to echo everything that Lex just said. And two, we're doing this at a high level. Obviously, this is coming from national, but we want to make sure that this trickles down to everyone. And then we kind of had the conversation about where do we start with that? That's kind of the reason why we're addressing the chapters first, because we know that there's more of a relationship with chapters, because we're starting with managers first, right? We want to be open and aware to the communities that these managers are actually serving. And there may be members of certain audiences that aren't even familiar with DEI. They might even have some resistance to it. I know that there has been a couple of conversations that I've had where there have been some members of boards that are resistant because they don't necessarily completely understand what this effort is really about. So instead of us trying to cram things down people's throats, like Lex just said, we want to just kind of introduce these concepts over time, gauge a group response, and then pivot or make adjustments to our approaches as we see necessary.
Yeah, and we're sort of embracing any resistance, right? Because it's just an opportunity to talk it out. So 100% of the time when we've had these conversations and we feel or blatantly encounter resistance to the ideas of DEI, once we talk about it and explain the intentions, the efforts are able to move forward. So yeah, so it's welcomed really. And that's why I loved Holly, the initial sort of kickoff of this talk is the questions and the feedback, it's totally welcome. So in terms of efforts, right, these DEI efforts in the chapter, the overarching goal is to better understand, like Melissa said, right, better understand, better communicate, and better connect with the chapter, the diverse people in the chapter. And diversity being, and I know we'll dive into that definition a bit more later, but really being all types of differences and perspectives. Yeah, the reason why these efforts help you understand and communicate is because the point of it is the I, it's the inclusion piece, right? So it's making sure that we're acknowledging different perspectives, making them part of the conversation, and really just being mindful about our community and our words and our actions so that we don't unknowingly exclude, right? I think that's the evolution of the conversation right now, right? We're not in a 1960s protest. That's not what this conversation is. This conversation is being aware so that we don't accidentally or unknowingly harm or exclude. And so starting with that DEI statement, that's what sort of sets that foundation for, hey, we care about this. We're going to pay attention to it. And then using that as a touch point as you move forward helps you honor that statement.
Yeah, and I agree with that too. And just kind of to further that, I think part of doing that and helping people to kind of see, that we care and that this is important to us is presenting this information in a way that makes them feel comfortable about what we're saying, but also just comfortable at, to a point where when they're attending certain events, even this webinar today, that they're comfortable. We're really taking into consideration our audience, the diversity of the audience, to making sure that this is just an inclusive space, making sure that those who are receiving this education, because, not just the people that we're talking to, but all of us need to hear it, that we're making good decisions about how we're getting that information out. Ultimately, we know that these discussions are timely, they're necessary. That's the whole point. That's the whole reason why we're doing this. And part of the reason why we're even reaching out to the chapters is because we know that they interact with our members the most often, right? So we just want to ensure that, at a high level, again, we're developing on we're focusing on the development and training, education, giving our chapters the tools that they need to address diversity and discrimination issues if those come up, providing that education on the state and federal laws that they're going to need to know about to address those issues. And even, how courts are handling those issues, board training if that's something that's necessary, but just the information that needs to get out and to get it into the right hands.
Yeah, so just to kind of conclude this section, I'll just echo, Noelle, what you said in terms of the fact that we're starting with the chapter and the chapter leadership, because everyone, I almost said you all, Melissa, y'all, because you all, sitting in Arizona, you have the most touch points with the members. Right. And so from the task force perspective, this makes a lot of sense to start with you.
Yeah. All right. So now we're going to move on and talk about community awareness and some other considerations and a little bit more about DEI statements. Of course, there's two critical purposes of them. I'll cover one. Lex, you can cover the next one. Essentially, the more common use for a DEI statement is just to kind of, again, broadcast that commitment to diversity and inclusion to current and potential members, partners, and employees. And again, we'll talk about the business partner aspect of it in just a little bit, but that's one of the more common things that people use DEI statements for. There is a less common reason for them though.
Yeah, and so the less common, the second reason is to align your commitment to DE&I with your overall business strategy. So that's a bigger one, right? I don't think that you bite off both at the same time. I think you have an awareness of, like Noelle said, the first critical purpose is to make a public statement, to publicize your value. The second is that your statement itself serves as a roadmap to provide direction as to what you're doing in your chapter to meet your goals. That's the bigger one, right? This means tying DEI to your actions. It means considering diversity when you're forming committees, when you're planning events. Melissa touched on this. It's paying attention to DEI in the language that you use, the language you use in written materials, the themes that you might embrace, right, in certain client event and certain events, within your chapters, with your members. And so, yeah, that second use is sort of, you go beyond the lip service and you use the public statement as a touch point for action.
Yeah, I think that's something that we don't really pay attention to most of the time, because It's just the less commonly known reason for the DEI statement. But two, when we're actually creating this DEI statement, like, CAI National, adopted this DEI statement, we're asking people to adopt something, a DEI statement, not necessarily the same one that CAI has adopted, but something that would just let people know that they are, we're all on the same wavelength. But a lot of people have been asking about what the strategy should be for even adopting a statement. And I think a clear strategy should contain what that statement or what DEI actually means to the organization that's adopting it, why it even matters for you now and in the future. And then it should also include some sort of understanding of how you approach DEI. So like for whatever activities that you have now and what things that you plan in the future. I've gotten that question a lot, like why, what do we even do? How do we even go about adopting a DEI statement? But I think those three things, what it means to you, why it matters to you, and how you approach DEI should be three components that you take into consideration when developing a statement.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, the national statement's great and well vetted and thoughtful. But there's a variety of examples. And so, from a chapter perspective, right, based on wherever you're located in the country, I mean, there could be a local business that you think that your values align with, and you can peek at their statement. So yeah, I agree with those as being the critical components. And then, we welcome you to put that statement into action. And again, it's subtle, right? So, that second intention for this idea, putting your statement into action, it doesn't have to be a gigantic, controversial, grand gesture, right? It could be something as easy as, a reminder at chapter meetings, let us revisit, our statement. And again, it's just a regular touch point to, hey, I'm about to put pen to paper on something. Am I having an awareness of how this might be translated into the various different types of people that are reading it, that are part of our chapter and part of our community?
Yeah. And then I think too, the overarching goal here is to make sure that a person who is looking into your organization, who is reading your statement that is hopefully posted on your website so people can actually see it, would be assured in knowing that you are committed, you and your group are committed to that diversity, equity, inclusion, and that culture of belonging, and that you're actually receptive to the whole idea, right? That you have, you already have diverse teams, or that you're receptive to having diverse teams, differing perspectives, because I think ultimately that's really important too. You gain so much when you have differing perspectives, right? That's part of the inclusivity. That's part of, the equity, the portion of the whole thing.
And it drives membership. Yeah. Right. So, it has the ability to increase chapter membership or increase chapter engagement when people feel like they're included and they're embraced. From my law firm's perspective, we see this all the time. Well, I'll be sitting with applicants for a job, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, I looked at your webpage and I noticed the diversity," right? Like that is what people are doing. That's a point of reference before they decide to join, right? Yeah. So one of the benefits of doing this, not only just from the perspective of doing less harm, but also from the perspective of increasing membership.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure.
So wrapping up our section with just the idea of business partner relationships. So everything we've been talking about, we sort of had in the context of the chapter and of the chapter membership, like from a manager member perspective. You can pick up that context that starts with managers, and you can broaden it to include the business partner relationships, right? So the DEI statements are further put into action by considering diversity or considering the commitment to diversity when you're forming and maintaining relationships with business partners, when you're forming and maintaining them. So, our business partners are companies that provide products or services to the industry. And DEI awareness can be spread to them if your chapter membership demands it, right? If your chapter membership values DEI, then that can help grow it into the business partner network.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think this is a less obvious topic. Like, I don't think that we consider the fact that our business partners might be concerned about DEI, but we considered a couple of issues related to business partner relationships earlier in DEI, and one of them is while managers are requesting those bids and vetting those business partners, they may also be doing the same thing, right? The business partners might be searching for that front-facing DEI statement and the action behind it to ensure that the organization that they're aligning themselves with also aligns with their company's values. They might also want to know that the group that they're working with is committed to inclusivity and that culture of belonging that we just talked about. So that's probably something that we don't always think about. We're probably just thinking like, oh, this company is coming to do our landscaping. They don't care about whether or not we're diverse, but maybe they do. So that's just something that we need to keep in the back of our minds as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, the business partners are companies too, right? And so if they have strong DEI values, then when they send their employees or their contractors out into the world, that's who they want them affiliating with or dealing with. So yeah, but also from that business relationship perspective.
Yeah.
All right, well, do you want to pause? Noelle and I can pause in this section if there's any specific questions about anything we've talked about. So chapter diversity and education, community awareness considerations, and business partner relationships. Does anyone have any questions you want to talk about in these sections?
I do.
See anything? Oh,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Kate from Arizona. So I got 2 of my chapter members on this committee, I see. So hello, Gussus. How are you? So I'm going to ask this question, and it may not be everybody's cup of tea, let's just say. So we obviously have different membership categories to begin with, right? So we're already diverse in that nature, and how, as a chapter executive director, which is my role, is to create events, activities, what have you, to meet the diverse membership. Right. And every state, obviously, demographics are different, and political values and culture values are different. I spent many years living in DC and Philadelphia, grew up in San Diego, and now live in Arizona. But most of my adult life was working on the East Coast. You're right. East Coast folks and West Coast and then Arizona are a little different. And cultures are different, values are different. But if I'm hired as an executive director, to know that I have a multitude of different memberships, I'm already looking at diversity. And coming from somebody who worked at a YMCA for 20 years on the East Coast, knowing about the cultural diversity of my membership already, I'm already, as an executive director, knowing that I need to have diverse cultures and events and activities to the best of my ability within my demographics. So my question more is, I'm aware of that, and I just happen to be coming from the organization prior to here, because that's, diversity is important in the YMCA. So why do I need to, and it's already in our governance structure, it's in our policies and how we operate. Why do I need to put out a statement and potentially on my website that in our culture, in our state, may not be looked at as a positive thing? The chapter staff are diverse, as far as that. The board is not as diverse, but that just happens to be the board, which I cannot control. But I guess I get what you're saying, but if I'm already making sure that's happening to the best of my ability, why do I need to advertise that we're thinking of things like that when it may not go over well with the majority of my membership or the culture and demographics of our state, let's say?
So what I hear you say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm pinned, so I'm just looking at me, Noelle, and Kate. Can I jump in?
Yeah, you and Melissa were going to say something. So
Oh, I'm sorry, Melissa.
that's okay.
I feel like I jumped in because I'm like, it's Kate, it's Arizona.
That's okay.
And I totally hear you. So I guess what I want to say is what I heard you say, Kate, is you're walking the walk, right? Like maybe you're
As
less
best as we
concerned
can.
with talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, like maybe you're less concerned with talking the talk because you're walking the walk. Everything you said is that you already plan diverse events, that you have diversity as a consideration in your governance, right? That your perspective professionally is informed by diversity as a value. So when Noelle and I said that there's two purposes for a DEI statement, Noelle's more obvious, more popular purpose is to publicly declare your values. The less obvious, less popular purpose is to do it, right? So what I heard you say is you're doing it. From my perspective, I hear you because of the demographics, particularly the politics in our state, right? Sometimes DEI statements can be misinterpreted as a political statement. And I guess what I want to say is it's not, right? So a DEI statement is not a political statement, and that's not the intention. But to Kate's point, that doesn't mean that people won't misinterpret it as such. And so it has to do, if you adopt a public statement, I think, Kate, in our state, the best way to do that would be to describe exactly what you just described. You don't even, I mean, you don't even have to say all of the buzzwords. You could say, here's what our chapter does, right? And you could highlight those pieces in the governance. So I'm excited for you to have said what you said, because that's a great reflection on your chapters and the state. But Melissa, you go.
No, I was just going to add to that I think it's amazing, like what Lex said, that you are doing, and you are being all things DEI. And I guess part of my question back to you would be, but is your board? And are members of the chapter presenting the same efforts that you are within their communities that they're representing? And so that's part of the intent too, and that's part of the discussions the Board of Trustees had, is you might personally be doing it, but is everyone understanding why you're doing it? Or are they relaying it to the people that they're around? And it raises a greater level of awareness and discussion to the conversation.
Well, and I hear what you're saying. And I guess so our governance structure is such that how the chapter operates and the flow and the culture of the chapter starts with me. That is how our operating structure is, and it's complex. Is the board. The board supports the policies that I come up with and that we already have established, and then I run with those policies. I think diversity, inclusion, and equity, or vice versa, sorry, it's a subtle concept. And I know that it's a buzzword lately, and people, especially in our culture here, would get worked up and turn it into more politics than it needs to be. There is a huge culture difference between Phoenix and Tucson, and now that we're one chapter, it's a migration of the two thought processes intertwined so that they get along with each other. That's a whole nother story, as well as types of events. But Arizona, there's not too much diversity here as far as demographics, and so from there you have to grow, and you do have people moving in from other states, and it's changing subtly. But I guess, for my opinion, I guess it has to start with me for my board to sense it, and then for them to make sure that they're doing it as well. And it's my job to evaluate them. It goes both ways, that making sure that they're sticking to their policies. So that is my role as the executive director here, which is a little different, is to make sure my board is thinking of those things, and that I'm promoting policies that are appropriate and culture that's appropriate. And just because I happen to have so much experience in different parts of the state and different parts of the country, and a person that is a Hispanic background, and the struggles that I had to endure growing up and where I am now, I do understand what you guys are trying to do. I just think a more subtle approach in our chapter is more appropriate than really, hi, waving it out there and everything. So I guess that's just where I'm coming from. Not that I don't support it. I just think it's more of a subtle thing for our environment. But I agree that the board should consider some of that stuff as well and not be closed-minded in the future.
And Kate, I would highly suggest that Melissa is a resource to you as well. Being on our board of trustees and functioning much in the same way as you do under policy governance. For those of you others on the call, I know most of you, if not all of you, are not on the same policy governance. So I think she would be a great resource for you on how she's working with our board of trustees, because she's, like she said, just presented them, with a presentation as well. So I'm going to offer you up, Melissa. Hopefully that's okay as a resource to Kate as well. But thank you, Kate, for that input. And Augustus, did you want to, you unmuted yourself, and then Aaron, we see your hand up. So we're coming to you next.
Sure. I just wanted to take the other side of that coin, the uncomfortable side of that coin. And the uncomfortable side of that coin is perception is reality. And as Lexis and Noel so eloquently stated, people are looking for these types of statements in order to feel comfortable. So while an organization can be implementing the good work of DEI, it may not be seen. And if it's not seen, it's not perceived. If it's not perceived, then people don't feel welcome. So the purpose of a DEI statement is not only to walk the walk, but it's also to advertise a welcoming environment. Not to keep it strictly towards Arizona, but I was born, raised, and educated in Arizona, and been here almost 50 years. And Arizona is a diverse state. A third of our state is Hispanic. So it's important that although it's important that although an organization may be subscribing to the tenets of DEI, it's also important to say it. As my mom would always say, don't leave words unsaid. Say what you feel. And so that's the importance of a DEI statement. I think in our chapter, personally in Arizona chapter, I've had experiences where I've been asked, hey, why don't you guys have a DEI statement? So, that's the uncomfortable other side of the coin. And, from a political standpoint, sometimes we have to be bold. Sometimes we have to stand on what we believe and stand on our morals. Now, you don't have to believe in DEI, I understand that, but sometimes we do have to make a political stand, although it may be unpopular. That was my comment.
Thank you. Thank you, Augustus. That's a great point. Erin, we want to get to you as well.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me okay? Okay, perfect. So I am very new. I'm with the West Florida chapter, and I'm the new membership director. How would I go about starting this? Is this like starting a task force, or do I just start this with a smaller conversation with the office and then branch that way?
So I can start with that. I think there's a couple of different ways that you can start. Since you're new, it's probably a good idea to start small. But I think maybe a small task force is a good idea. We mentioned you don't want to cram anything down anyone's throat, but you do want to kind of like get a feel for your organization and just kind of understand what your commitment to DEI would be. And then, I think you could probably take a look at the CAI National DEI Statement and decide if that's something that aligns with your group. If not, then you guys could, create something of your own or maybe amend the one that's already in place. But the fact that you want to start is awesome. We love that. Awareness of the fact that it's necessary is awesome. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add to that.
Thank you. We're a melting pot, but we're also Florida. So coming from the Sarasota, Bradenton, we've got young college campuses and we've got quite old companies. So it's really nice to have that diversity and inclusion. And I think that's really necessary for at least our chapter to have that statement.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
if I'm happy to share that the Washington State chapter took a slightly different approach in creating the mission. So we had our task force created, and instead of creating the mission and values ahead of reaching out to membership, we did a survey to really gauge what it was that membership understood about DEI, and based on the answers, what it appears that people need out of it. And then from that, we created the mission and the purpose. And then we have sort of like all of these engagement activities and processes that we'd like to see the chapter go through. So just to give you another option.
That's great feedback. And that's what this call is about too, Erin. I encourage you, to reach out to Jackie, for advice. Yeah, go ahead, Augustus.
So I think it's also important to understand that, and I'm sure we all do, that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just a race-based issue. It's also age, it's class, it's religion, it's diversity of thought, political diversity. And so, I think it's important that when we think about DEI, we think about all of the aspects and the different components of it. Because if you think about it that way, as I said in my earlier remarks, we all have a unique skill, we all have a unique viewpoint. And the goal in DEI is to allow everyone to feel comfortable in expressing their unique circumstance and viewpoint. So, I just wanted to just have that comment that DEI covers a lot of different areas of diversity. It's not just one particular area that the committee is trying to highlight.
Absolutely. We talk about that a lot, Augustus. Thank you for bringing up that point. Melissa, I know you're going to talk about some definitions of diversity.
So I don't know if it's possible, just given the time, if we can send out the definitions to everyone just so they can see the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I do apologize. I have a board meeting that starts at 3 o'clock. And so that's part of why I'm not going to go into reading all of them. Everyone on this call knows how important preparing for board meetings are. But based on what Augustus just said, I do want to just kind of emphasize that the DEI components, they are important from an awareness factor. And if Matt Ober were here, he would bring up, I think, what his phenomenal idea was, and that we all need to be, and what we are and how we present is so unique and diverse, and that we all need to be aware of each other's uniqueness, because it goes well beyond race, gender, physical disability, those parts. And something just jumped out at me in some of the materials that we prepared for this, in that our goal with this is to heighten the awareness so that we do not isolate, exclude, or offend those. Like, that needs to be, no matter where you are, having aware of what your culture is, so that way your efforts, whether it's planning an event, sending out a communication, that you're not isolating, excluding, or offending. And just to give perspective to that, I was in a community in Florida where the celebration of Diwali, it was significant in a community. And I was in an association office when calls were coming in from other residents who were complaining about the lights and the decorations. I had never thought of that. I had never realized that aspect of it. And what it raised awareness to is that there needs to be communication and discussion around that within the community. And so making sure that the greater community that we talked about earlier understands the cultures that are happening, what's the decorations that are going up, the events that are being celebrated, so that someone isn't being isolated or wrongfully having violation pictures taken and submitted for the decoration. So it's things like that where we can communicate proactively, whether it's from a CAI level at the chapter to send out to your membership and the emails of, don't forget this, you know, this event's coming up, this holiday's coming up that you might see in your communities, and help spread what you're aware of, you know, and not all board members, not all community managers experience those things to proactively communicate that to their homeowners. So that's a quick recap of that piece, Emily.
Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate it. And I know Noelle has shared with me an analogy that she uses too, and I'd love for you to touch on that analogy.
Yeah, sure. So just to kind of help me wrap my own mind around, you know, the differences between diversity, equity, and inclusion, I saw this analogy that kind of related everything to a party. So diversity is like being invited to the party. It's basically having visibly different people in the room is being like the bare minimum, right? Equity is having an accessibility ramp to the door of the party. Not everyone is going to be able to walk up the steps to the building or walk through the door. Inclusion is being asked to dance or being offered refreshments at the party. So then belonging is actually deciding the music, the decorations, or the food at the party. The best party is always the one you hate to leave because you feel like it's your party. And then it actually becomes your party when you're part of it and sharing responsibility according to your talents and not sitting around hoping to fit in. So I guess the DEI statement can really help make sure that everyone feels like it's their party.
Thank you. I love that. Thank you. And I will share, as Melissa said, I will share the definitions of DEI as well as the analogy. And now we'd like to open it up to any questions you may have. We have a few minutes left for that, and I don't want to rush. So any questions that you have for the group that we have here?
I'm also going to put the analogy. Someone just asked me to put the analogy in the chat, so I'll do that too.
Perfect. Thank you. I was trying to copy and paste the definitions too, and it's not doing it for me. So I hope you have better luck. Any comments or questions? Thank you, Jackie, for putting in the chat the statement that you are looking at, the mission as well as the purpose for the Washington State chapter. So feel free to look at that. Catherine, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious about one of the things, and unfortunately she had to sign off, was Melissa, but the example given of the Diwali thing. Or the Diwali celebration. I think that was really great. And then, you know, the idea of, you know, mentioning that in a newsletter or putting awareness out there to the community. But at the same time, you know, again, and I'm just asking because I'm just so new to this. What happens if then there's some type of celebration that I don't know about and I don't mention in a future newsletter? Do I run the risk of getting myself into a situation where I have to, you know, apologize to that person? What would then be the best way to handle that? You know, it's also, I think, just being careful as we go down this road, doing it correctly so that, you know, there's so many different groups as we've just outlined, and it's age, it's this, it's that, it's so many different things. But you know, and again, the approach is we're being genuine and sincere and wanting to embrace this and make this our statement. But how do we broach subjects like that? You know, because what happens if you do innocently get it wrong or make that mistake where you acknowledge one celebration, but you just didn't know enough that there was some other type of celebration the next month that should be acknowledged.
Can I chime in, Emily? I think that's yeah, I think that's a great question. So I guess what I would say is you can only do the best that you can, right? And so part of doing your best is paying attention, is engaging your community, is touching into the values of DEI. And these types of situations can be tricky to navigate. And so in your hypothetical of, hey, you know, you caught one holiday, you were proactive about it, and you missed the next one, it's never too late to do the right thing. So you can note it for next year. You could do a subsequent follow-up of, hey, here's some awareness. We had a lot of X type of celebrations in our community last week, right? Like, so yeah, so these conversations around diversity can sometimes, you know, open up a possibility to step right in it, right? And when you do that, you just acknowledge it and move forward. So I guess I would just encourage you not to be paralyzed from doing anything by the fear of making a mistake. Mistakes might happen. If they do, we move on.
Lex, that's so good. I'm glad you brought that up. I work very closely with our staff DEI task force, and I've served on that now for, gosh, 2 years, I think. And that's something that we really struggled with at first. What if we step on toes? What if we offend? What if we forget something or leave something out? Because we had the same idea about celebrating the different months and the different, you know, putting information about the different holidays. And finally, we just, like you said, Lex, we had to start somewhere. And we were very upfront with the staff, like, listen, we may mess this up at times. And I've said and done the wrong things that have offended someone, unfortunately, and that is just an opportunity for me to have a conversation with them. And now me and that person have the most amazing relationship because I said to them, I am so sorry. I had no idea. Please educate me about that. You know, tell me about that. And just my wanting to learn about them and about what they were saying went so far. And so I think that rings true at the chapter level too. I was just talking to the crew about this before this call. Like, we're not saying we've arrived at this statement. We're saying that we are working to become, that we are striving to do this, you know, and I think that is an important aspect of it as well.
And I think what you've described is embracing inclusion. So if you're through the statement, through the actions that you take, you're creating an environment of inclusion that might invite that feedback, right? Hey, you forgot my thing, or you said this thing that might be polarizing, or, you know, that might exclude people. So all of that is part of fostering that environment of inclusion. But it is being receptive to that feedback, right? And then moving forward with it.
Absolutely. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, okay, go ahead, Rick. You're on mute, though.
A management agent that I know very well, Drew Mulhare, is on this call, and he will attest to the fact that I never, ever remembered to unmute. So that pattern continues. You know, I am a volunteer leader and maybe one of the few on the call. And as one, I've a generation in participating in many different types of diversity and inclusion discussions. I was struck by something Augustus said, and I want to recognize him for it, call him out on it, and then I'm going to add a little bit of my own take, if you don't mind. And that was his point that such an illustration of a value also helps people to understand who you are. It may make them, certainly information makes people more comfortable, whether they agree with it or not, because they better understand who you are. And as partners look at organizations, this type of a value helps people in the way they perceive. Yeah, it can get politicized, but at a relationship level, this is extremely important. So Augustus, thank you for adding that angle. I hadn't heard others deal with it that way. The second thing I wanted to say is that I have contributed now at an association level, both on a community board and now as on a chapter board. And I'm trying to better articulate the values of our types of organizations. Value statements are awfully so boring. And what I'm beginning to do is to link this to civility. It is one angle on how we illustrate our values. I became a fan of civility so many times the more I learned of it. And I think DEI is another angle on how you value yourself, how you value your relationships, and how you want others to value you. And I'm going to try to incorporate the two as our chapter goals come together next year, so that people can look at these values and say, that's who they are. I get it. That's all I had to say, Kelly. I'm now going to mute, and it's been a pleasure.
Rick, I appreciate it. I really appreciate that. And I love that's why we're doing this, for light bulbs to go off and for you to be able to take things back to your chapter. So is there anything else from the panel that you'd like to add before we close out? Okay, so I thank you all for joining us today. I do want to let you know that this will not be the last of this conversation. We do want to continue this. And so we are actually going to do a part 2 of this. We talked about doing a case study of a couple chapters who've adopted a statement and started implementing some things. So I'm actually opening that up to you right now. If you have done that and you would like to be a part of that conversation, please reach out to myself or any of the other panelists today and let us know of your interests. We plan to do that in the next few months, give you a little bit of time to digest this, take it back to your board, and then we're going to be doing that. So please let me know if it's something that you're interested in, and we will share the recording with you. Thank you again for your time today, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.